Welcome, patrons. I've normally been switching between elven gods and old gods, but as there are more elven, we're doubling up. So let's talk about the last elven god before we get to the exciting ones, the All-Father Elgar'nan. Myth. Elgar'nan is fairly unique in the Dalish pantheon as he actually has an origin story that places him right at the beginning of the world. As the Dalish say, the only things that existed were the sun and the land. The sun became curious about the land, bowed his head close to her body, and Elgar'nan was born. The land gave him great birds and beasts of the sky and forests, and spread plants for him as a gift, which he valued. The sun grew jealous of these gifts, so burned them all to ashes. The land cracked and cried the oceans into existence from the loss. Elgar'nan was angry with his father, so he wrestled the sun. The battle lasted for an eternity, as the Dalish say, and eventually the sun grew weak and was thrown into the abyss created by the land's sorrow. The world was then covered in shadow, with the only thing that remained in the sky being the sun's blood, or stars, as we know them. But pleased, he went to his mother, the land, and tried to help her grow what was lost. But it could not be done without the sun. She begged him to release the sun, but he refused out of pride. And this is where Mythal steps in. Literally, the legend said she just popped out of the ocean. She calms Elgar'nan with just a touch to his brow, and suddenly he knew his anger got the best of him. So he spoke to the sun. They made a deal that the sun would be gentle, returning to the earth each night, and the sun agreed. Also, as a result of the sun's capture, the Dalish believed that the residual heat from its time in prison created hot springs and considered them sacred. The Dalish also have a legend about the Dwarven people being scared of the sun because of Elgar'nan's fire. That's going to come up later, so just remember that. So as far as symbols go, Elgar'nan is connected to fire, light, and even lightning, all of which would burn his enemies to ashes. It's also believed that the constellation Solium was once dedicated to him. Elgar'nan also has one of the few implied romantic relationships within the pantheon, as many stories paint him as the father of most, if not all, the elven gods, with Mythal being the mother. And the largest temple of the Dales, back when the modern elves actually had a homeland, also belonged to Elgar'nan. Reality. Despite Elgar'nan being the supposed leader of the Evenuris, we don't actually know too much about him in ancient elven society. We know that the ancient elves would not call on him to deliver justice because his fury would destroy everything. Mythal instead seemed to be some sort of judge, which was approved by Elgar'nan due to her wisdom. But it seemed that when a case was serious, she actually passed it to Elgar'nan instead, which was something to be feared. At one point, there is a record that Falon and Elgar'nan had a major feud that almost led to a civil war, but Mythal diffused the situation by making a champion fight for their cause instead, which Elgar'nan's champion ended up winning the duel. Or, at least we assume, the champions were wearing gold and black, and one would assume the golden champion belonged to Elgar'nan. There is also another record of a statue being made for Elgar'nan for him being first among the gods, whatever that means. The record states that this giant statue was made in one afternoon by thousands of slaves, and it looked stern, with light shining from narrowed eyes and an open, snarling mouth. In the Temple of Mythal, there is also a song to Elgar'nan found. The song asks Elgar'nan to give the people victory over the shaking earth, strike some unknown usurpers, and bring winged death who try to throw down the elves' work. Theory. So one thing I want to talk about is that his name is one of the few that we have a sort of translation for as well. Elgar has been translated as spirit, as seen with the usage in the book The Masked Empire. The Nan part is a bit confusing, however. While the DA Wiki does list Nan as Revenge or Vengeance, the source of that is just the Codex for Elgar'nan, which doesn't actually translate his name. So while there are no other words that use the apostrophe Nan in them, there are plenty that just end in Nan. Some being Renan, meaning voice, Vanan, being heart but also a term of endearment, and perhaps the most important one, Elvenan, which was the name of the empire. So let's apply the supposed Nan into this meaning. It would then be something like People of Vengeance, or Revenge of the People. And while it sounds cool, I don't know, I have my doubts that they would name their entire empire that. So while I could be very wrong, I just want to express my doubts that Elgar'nan translates to Spirit of Vengeance or Revenge. It could easily be First Spirit, or Spirit Body, or something like that. Anyway, on to an actual theory. Something that is present in both myth and the reality we know was that Elgar'nan was the first of something. Many assume that he was the first to gain a body to become physical after so long of being a spirit. But he could have also been the first to find power to godhood, as seen in the wording first among the gods. And if we assume that the power involves the heart of titans, that would make sense with the so many references with the war against the Dwarven people. So far, one of the most consistent things about Elgar'nan is that he seems to have some anger issues and likes burning things to ashes. While his stories seem to paint his anger as being well placed, it also seems to get him into more trouble than actually doing any good. Mythal, on the other hand, seemed to have some sort of control or trust with Elgar'nan, either that being romantic, as implied in the Dalish legend, or perhaps Mythal was excellent in debating down his anger. Either way, she is the only one able to calm him. So, in perhaps what might be my stupidest theory, I'd like to present to you that perhaps Elgar'nan was a dragon, or at least took the body of a dragon, assuming that all ancient elves were once spirits, and Elgar'nan was something like Hakon in Jaws of Hakon. In the spirit of Elgar'nan, they asked for his winged death. He's heavily connected to fire and anger, and so are dragons. And finally, Mythal seems to have some sort of special connection to dragons, with those associated with her being able to turn into one, and even in the modern age, she was able to lend one to the Inquisitor, because why not? Now let's also combine this with his first among the gods. So far, the only way we know of to get relative immortality combines the Blight and dragons. There's also some theory that being able to feed off magic of the Fade helps as well with not aging, but remember, that's different than immortality. You can still die, you just don't die from aging. But with what Corypheus had going on, he was able to come back to life, so relative immortality. So assuming that the Blight came to the Titans, which is a leading theory on the Blight, and assuming that Elgar'nan has some access to dragons, which is also another common theory that all the Elven gods had something with dragons, it's possible that Elgar'nan stumbled onto some sort of, perhaps a proto-Blight or something like that, one that might have been less dangerous, and him either being attached to or even being a dragon helped create him into First of the Gods. And even if he stumbled on the real Blight and became something like Corypheus, perhaps that also explains his anger issues. And that, dear patrons, is all that I have on Elgar'nan. Do you have lingering questions, proof that I'm wrong, comments about your own fan theory? Feel free to tweet me at Arlathan on Twitter or send a PM to user Gillinan on Reddit. Taras Shiral.